Good morning. For those that don't know me, I'm Andrew Leisure. I'm the pastor here, and I'm so thankful to have every one of you here this morning. And those who are tuning in online, we're glad to have you as well. If you're online, go ahead and shoot us a message and let us know where you're listening from. That's really, really cool to see who's listening and where you're from. So we're in the middle of a series called Red Flags. We talked about some things last week. We talked about why red flags in relationships are important. And we looked at the life of Samson. And we talked about the story of Samson and Delilah and how he disregarded all the red flags in his life and the red flags in relationships. He was constantly seeking things for himself, and he ended up in a situation with a woman that ended up betraying him in the end. And he didn't completely reach his full potential for God. And that's kind of the crux of this entire series. We're looking at the idea of red flags in ourselves, but we're also looking at the red flags in the people that we're in relationships with. And it's not just romantic relationships that I'm talking about. Yes, a lot of this has to deal with romantic relationships, has to do with the relationship with a spouse or a future spouse or a girlfriend or boyfriend, but it's also talking about relationships among one another, because we all know people. We're all in relationships with people, and we're all seeking to be in relationships with people. So these are all things that we can look at. Well, today, I want to look at an aspect of one of the specific red flags that we need to be looking at in our relationships. And as I was doing it, as I was preparing this, I was thinking about something, and I came across one of my favorite players when I was a kid. I was a San Francisco 49ers fan as a football team when I was a kid, because I loved Joe Montana, and then I loved Steve Young. I follow quarterbacks. I really like some of these quarterbacks. And, well, Steve Young, when he was the quarterback, he had a guy he got to throw to named Terrell Owens. How many people are familiar with Terrell Owens? This guy. Number 81. He was an excellent receiver. He's top 5 in every enviable category, every category that you would want to be in if you're a wide receiver in the NFL, the National Football League. And if you want to go down in history as one of the best, you want to reach these different accolades, and he has kind of reached them all except for the Super Bowl. He didn't win a Super Bowl even though he was there, and he almost won single-handedly. But one of the things about Terrell Owens was he renamed himself T.O. He was all about himself. In fact, he would, in interviews, they would ask him things, or they'd catch him on the sidelines, and after he would do something, he was very out there about things, and he wanted everybody to know who he was. And one of his taglines was this: "I love me some me." Anybody know somebody like that? I love me some me. Now, for me being a little kid, I thought it was great. I was like, this guy's awesome. I love me some me, and he's strutting around all the time, and he's always doing crazy stuff. He loved himself so much that he had so much confidence in himself that when he would go to games and play in these big-time games, he was the first one who brought a black magic marker, a Sharpie, and he stuck it in his sock. And you know what it was for? Well, when he scored a touchdown against the Seattle Seahawks, he got that football, he pulled that Sharpie out of his sock, he signed it, and he gave it to a fan. And he says, I love me some me. He, as a 49er, when they went to play the Dallas Cowboys, when he scored a touchdown, he ran out to the middle of the field and stood on the star, kind of like the gladiator. Are you not entertained? He's out here on this star, the Dallas Star, and if anybody understands football and knows something like this, the Dallas Cowboys star is sacred. You don't go stand on the star as a visiting team and, strut your stuff. Well, people got frustrated about it. But I love me some me. And so he's out there, and he scores another touchdown another time. And one of the defenders of the Cowboys didn't like it very much, George Teague. And so he tackled him right there on the Dallas Star as T.O. ran over to get on the star again, and it started something. But this was kind of the things that followed T.O. One of his taglines on the sideline, he would strut around, he'd say, "Who can make a play?" And before anybody could answer, "I can." Now, granted, the first time he said this was after he didn't catch a single pass in the first half. He was dropping passes, but he was trying to psych himself up. All this to say that this was a guy who was clearly self-absorbed. Right? It was his world, and everybody else was just living in it. Well, one of the things about T.O., as great of a football player as he was, and although he's top 2 in some stats, top 5 in others, when it came time for his Hall of Fame induction or his chance to get inducted into the Hall of Fame, he didn't make the cut. He had all the numbers. He should have been a shoo-in. He didn't make the cut. And a couple years went by and he kept not making the cut. And the reason he didn't make the cut was because I love me some me. Didn't rub off so well on other people. They literally kept him out of the National Football League Hall of Fame because they didn't like who he was because he was all about himself. 100% self-absorbed. He went to multiple teams and they described him as a cancer in the locker room. They described him as a cancer in the huddle. He would go out after a game and he would talk to the reporters, and if they lost or something, or even if they won, if he felt like he didn't catch the ball enough because he didn't get enough targets, he would throw his quarterback under the bus. Anytime that anything went bad, he was pointing his finger at other people. He thought so highly of himself that he never thought he was the problem. And he was constantly saying, if I had a better quarterback, we would win. If those guys on defense would play better, we would win. If those other receivers would do their job, we would win. Blah, 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 blah. We would win because I love me some me and there's no way I'm the problem. Again, I want to ask, do you guys know anybody like that? Red flags. T.O. was full of red flags. We see it all over the place. What do you call somebody who loves me some me? Sometimes we call them self-absorbed, self-centered. Sometimes we call them narcissists. Well, last week I defined this idea of what a red flag is, and I said a red flag is a warning signal or a sign. Something that indicates or draws attention to a problem, a danger, or an irregularity. And what we wanted to understand with these red flags is it's our job. We need to identify the red flags in our relationships and people that we're considering getting into relationships with, romantic or platonic. We need to identify the red flags in our own life so that we know, am I the kind of person that people don't really like? I might love me some me, but nobody else does. We've got to be aware. We have to know what we're putting out there. We have to understand who we are. Well, the Bible provides wisdom for how to deal with these red flags. The Bible provides us, it's awesome about the Bible because you can go to it, you can open it up, you can read things, and God points you to things. And while you're reading it and reading about other people in there, you're reading about everybody else in the room that we're all pointing your finger at, right? Sitting here saying, I know a bunch of self-absorbed people. The Bible is working on our hearts and telling us, hey, Andrew, there's a little bit of self-absorption in you. There are some self-centered tendencies in you. And so today I want to talk about narcissism. What is a narcissist? Well, a narcissist is a person who has an excessive interest in or admiration of themselves. They think the world revolves around them. As I said earlier, it's their world, we're just living in it. If you're a narcissist, let me let you in on a little secret. People don't really like you. If you only care about yourself, people don't really like you. It's off-putting. You like yourself a whole lot more than other people do. All right, so we talk about T.O. Let me go over here to my little bank of props. I know Josh likes the props. What's this? Mirror. What if I preached like this the whole time? Hey, you're doing a great job today. People love you. This reminds me of Saturday Night Live. There's that skit where that guy would look in the mirror. You know what I'm talking about. And he would talk about how wonderful he was. He would build himself up. What if I preached my whole series, I never looked at you guys once? You know. You got to cut the people out of your life that are absorbed with themselves, Andrew. Is that a good idea? Yeah, I think it is. What if I walked around all day like that? Katie, what if I did this in the house? Andrew, you look great today, buddy. Hey, Katie. You think Andrew looks good? See, we laugh. Because it's so stupid, isn't it? I mean, it's stupid. Yet it's what we do. We may not be carrying this mirror around, but it's what we do. We all walk around looking in the mirror. And the problem with only looking in the mirror is you're not seeing everyone else around you. The problem with looking in the mirror is I may look and see how I look on the outside, but the problem is I'm not seeing what you're dealing with. I'm not seeing what you're struggling with. I'm not seeing your problems because the only reflection I care about is my own. And what do we call that? But a red flag, right? Here we go again. You like this? You like this? When we look in the mirror and stare at ourselves, every situation, every circumstance that we look at is viewed through the mirror in hand. I may be able to see a couple things over my shoulder. I may be able to see a few of you, but I'm not seeing you very clearly because there's a big fat head in the way. A narcissist is a person with narcissistic traits. They're a person that has an exaggerated sense of self-importance. They lack empathy. They have a constant need for attention and praise. They have fantasies about power. They have a sense of entitlement. They have a history of exploiting others for their own gain. They have to feel superior. Our passage today is 2 Timothy chapter 3. I invite you to turn in your Bibles to 2 Timothy chapter 3. We're just going to look at the first paragraph in this passage, 2 Timothy chapter 3, toward the end of your Bible there. And I'm going to read something, but I need a volunteer. I need Byron, come here. You finally get your wish, man. You can see how you look on stage. All right. What I want you to do, I want you to throw that red flag up every time I read a description or give a character trait of what you would consider to be a red flag in a relationship. All right? And I want you to be exaggerated about this, all right? You act like you're frustrated when they make a call on the football field and you're throwing that red flag to challenge it. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, Paul writes, he says, "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days." The last days are the time from when Jesus came. Ever since the time he came till now. In verse 2 it says, "People will be lovers of themselves." This is good. He's got... All right. Don't get too excited. People, I love this guy. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents. That one stayed up there, guys. Ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Have nothing to do with such people. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Sometimes we need these illustrations so that we can remember, so that we can see what's going on and understand how to apply these things and look at them, look at ourselves, right? As we read this passage, as I read it there and I went through it, it was a list, right? It just kept going. And I got to be honest with you. The first time I read this list, I read through it and I kept thinking about those people. How many people in here, but don't raise your hand, but how many of you just now, as I read through those lists and Byron was waving the flag, did you think about those people rather than thinking about yourself? Well, Pastor Andrew, you just told us we're not supposed to think about ourselves. Well, that's not what I meant. We need to look at these red flags. We need to make sure that we're not displaying these character traits ourselves. Just as much as we're looking to keep out of relationships and protect ourselves from relationships from people who carry these things, we also need to make sure that we're not projecting these things as well. Our relationships, they go beyond just what we can get out of them. As you read this passage and you look at those verses, they're couched in these, they're bookended with this idea of love. It talks about in the last days, people will be lovers of themselves. I love me some me. Lovers of money. And then jumps on down, it says that they will lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And so all of these things, as you look at it, they're a progression of what happens when all you do is love me some me. We're going to go through the passage a little bit, one by one, but one of the things that we need to be careful of is that we don't get caught thinking that we can't be narcissists. Now, not a person who displays a little bit, some of these tendencies is a narcissist. Just because you have this character trait or that character trait, it doesn't mean you're a narcissist. But in general, the idea, are you self-centered? Are you self-absorbed? Do you walk around with the mirror in your hand all day, only looking out for yourself first? Got to be careful of that. Another thing about narcissism, it's not just about those who think highly of themselves. See, we get caught in the lie to think that, well, if someone is conceited and they're on an ego trip, then they're a narcissist, but everybody else is safe. Well, see, there's a problem. See, narcissism doesn't just apply to people who think high and mighty of themselves. It also applies to people who think lowly of themselves, who are constantly feeling bad about themselves and are constantly looking inward. And they don't interact with people because they don't feel like they're enough, because they're constantly looking in that mirror. Our relationships need to go beyond just what we can get out of them. If they don't, they're probably not good relationships. Wives, don't raise your hand and get too excited about answering this, but in your relationship with your husband, is it a good week when all he does is cares about himself? No. Husbands, in your relationship with your wife, is it a good week when all she does is care about herself? No. Parents, is it a good week when your kids only care about themselves and they're not concerned about you? Vice versa. Our relationships shouldn't just be about ourselves. We shouldn't be in relationships to receive. We should be in relationships to give. When someone cares for us, they're self-giving. Their decisions and their experiences are not about receiving something. Ultimately, it's about giving. God doesn't want us to focus on ourselves. Yes, He wants us to improve. He wants us to focus on Him. And as we focus on Him, then we will improve. As we focus on Him, our relationships will improve. God wants the world to see us as the church, His people who say, I'm a Christ follower. God wants the world to see Christ followers as people who love others, who are not in it for themselves. Here at Bridge Church, what's our tagline? Real life connections. This is not a connection. There's no way to let anybody in if all I'm doing is this. I've got to put the mirror down. Maybe pick it up and use it in a different way. But we can't here at Bridge Church be about real life connection if we're only focused on ourselves. Okay, this is the pastor serious moment. This is the one that people are like, man, he's being mean. Listen, if all you do is come in this church and sit in your seat and have no interest in the people around you, you're not making real life connections. And we are not living up to our standard of what the big sign out there says, real life connections. We have to be about others. If you're not about others, guess what you are? I love me some me. Narcissist. And I'll tell you, friends, we're up against it. We're up against this idea of individualism, this idea of narcissism, because we have a sin nature. We have a nature that says, it's all about me, it's only about me. I'm going to do for me whatever I want for me. But that's just one problem. We're also up against it because we live in a place called the United States of America. We are the most self-absorbed culture in the world. I would put money on that. This nation was grounded and founded on independence, which led to individualism, which led to, I'm going to do anything I can to get ahead in the world, and it doesn't matter who I step on. I'm telling you, just experiment. Step into any other culture that's in the United States, and you're going to see they're all about serving others and being with others and making sure that the other people, like they're ashamed if you come in their house and they haven't served you in some way. Americans, people come in the house, we don't even answer the door, we just stay sitting on the couch watching the TV. Hey, go get yourself a drink if you want, whatever. All that to say, we're up against it. We're living in a nation that is about self-absorption. We've got a sin nature that's about self-absorption, self-centeredness, narcissism. Do you know where the word narcissism comes from? It comes from Greek mythology, from a figure in Greek mythology named Narcissus. And guess what he did? He was infatuated with his own reflection to the point that he died and withered away because he couldn't do anything but look at himself all day. We need to allow God to remove the red flag of narcissism, of self-absorption, of lovers of me, of ourselves and our life. And our lives is so that we can address it in our own relationships. So, let's get back to this passage. Our goal should be to truly love others in our relationships rather than just seek relationships to get what we want. That's the picture. You want to know what's today's message about? It's this. We can't be all that we were designed to be if we only look at ourselves. You can't be all you're designed to be if you're in a relationship with someone who's only looking out for themselves. So let's just break this passage down. We're going to go through some of these words. I'm going to jump through and we're going to see where we end up. But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. Paul is describing to another pastor, Timothy. He's writing to him and he's saying, hey, from this time going forward, until Jesus returns at His second coming, until He comes back and gets His people, we are stuck in this situation where there are going to be people who are all about themselves. People will be lovers of themselves. Lovers of money. Boastful. That word boastful, I just started doing word studies on all these words in here, and it was a lot of words. I'm not going to give you every one. But one interesting word that I came across in the Greek for this idea of boastful was an empty pretender. Someone who's full of hot air. A person who arrogantly presumes too much about himself. As we're going through this, I want you to ask yourself, is this me? Before you ask, is this the person that I'm in relationships with? Because I know you're all sitting there and you got this one person in your mind. You're like, hey, every single one of those things you read was about so-and-so. Nope. Is it me first? I'm gonna read a quote from a guy named John Stott, who is a really, really strong biblical scholar on this passage. I want you to see what he said. He said, the first says that they are lovers of self, and the last, in verse 4, says that they are not, as they should be, lovers of God. Indeed, 4 of the 19 expressions are compounded with love, suggesting that what is fundamentally wrong with these people is that their love is misdirected. So the question is your love misdirected? Is it directed at self, or is it ultimately directed at others? And so John Stott continues, he said, instead of being first and foremost lovers of God, they're lovers of self, lovers of money, and lovers of pleasure. The first 3 enlarge on the meaning of self-love. People who love themselves best become proud or boastful. They become arrogant, and then they become abusive. The first word means braggarts. The second, haughty or disdainful, which leads naturally to the third, which is slanderous. Because inevitably, those who have an exaggerated opinion of themselves look down with contempt upon others and speak evil of them. That's from John Stott. I just wanted to read that because he said it better than I can. And as we're looking at these words, we look at this idea of boastful. We look at these ideas and understand that it's a trajectory. It's a downward trajectory. And it all starts with loving me some me. So the next word there, it says, people will be proud, arrogant. But we know in James chapter 4, verse 6, it says, God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. So if you're not supposed to be boastful and you're not supposed to be proud, what should you be? You should be humble. You should be without ego. Okay, so here's the juxtaposition. You don't want to be boastful. You don't want to be proud. You don't want to be in relationships with people that are boastful and proud, because at the end of the passage, remember, it said have nothing to do with them. That's not Pastor Andrew's words. Now, we need some discernment on what that actually looks like, but it's at the end of the passage. So if they're not boastful and they're not proud, then what should they be? They should be humble. We should be humble. We should be egoless. Modest. But then it gets to this place where it says they're abusive. It comes to this word blaspheme. To defame a person. To defame, a person who defames someone or something. A blasphemer, a defamer, someone who speaks evil words, someone who slanders. Who wants to be in a relationship with a person who is boastful, who thinks highly of themselves, who's an empty pretender, they're putting on a show? Who wants to be in a relationship with someone who's too proud to admit when they're wrong? Who wants to be in a relationship with someone who's abusive, someone who blasphemes, someone who speaks evil of you? That's not a good friend. Its original meaning for this word blasphemer or abusive is injurious speaking, damaging tongue. Someone who wants to speak harm into people's lives. Well, what trait should we have? What traits should we look for if we're not looking for abuse? Respect. You want to look for people that are respectful, courteous, polite, someone who is praiseful, laudatory, acclaiming, someone who applauds you. The people in your life, do they get happy when you win? Are they excited about your wins too? Or do they say mean things? Well, the only reason that you won that was because blah, blah, blah. Or do they say, go get him, that was awesome. I'm so happy for you that you're in this great relationship. I know my life is junk right now and I'm not where I want to be, but I really honestly am happy that you're in a relationship where God wants you right now. Do you have those kinds of people in your life? Are you that kind of person? Or are you the kind of person that people don't want to tell you the good things that are happening because they know that you're going to envy them? They know that you're going to say something hurtful. Another, people will be lovers of themselves and they'll be ungrateful. The idea of not being thankful. Their lifestyle reflects thanklessness. Why do you think that is? Why is someone who says, I love me some me, tend to be ungracious, tend to not be thankful, tend to be ungrateful? Because they have a sense of entitlement. That what came to them was supposed to come to them anyway because they're so special. Be careful of these kinds of people. Be careful that it's not you yourself. These aren't fun red flags today, are they? An ungrateful person is unpleasant. Well, what traits should they have? Well, they should be appreciative. They should be grateful. They should be thankful. Did they say thankful? Do they say thank you when you hand them stuff? Kids, like when your parents give you a meal, are you thanking them? When dad comes home from work and he's beat after the end of the day, he's tired, he's worn out, are you thanking him for going to work for you? To put food on your table, to give you a bed? Are you thanking your mom for running you around to every single sports event under the sun? Parents, are you thankful for your kids? Are you thankful for the opportunities that they give you to show them love when they need it? Are you thankful for the opportunities that God's given you to train them up in righteousness? Or are you ungrateful about it? Another red flag is someone who's unholy. The idea of ungodly, those who reject religious obligations. But it's even more than that. In the Greek here, it means pertaining to what is not consecrated or devoted to God. They're people who don't care about being set apart. People who say, I'm a member of Bridge Church, or I'm excited to be part of Bridge Church, but it's not going to make a difference in how I live my life. I refuse to be set apart from the world around me. Set apart to God. Someone who's unholy. What should they be instead of unholy? What should we be if we're not unholy? We should be devout. We should be God-fearing. Prayerful, reverent. Devotional. And spiritual. Paul continues and he says that these people are without love. And this definition of love, this word in the Greek for love, it means devoid of natural affection, heartless. Does this describe you? Or can you be this way in certain areas? Maybe that's a better way to ask it. Does the person that you're considering getting into a relationship with, can they be heartless with you? Have nothing to do with them. It says that someone who is without love, it pertains to a lack of love or affection for close associates or family. This word is talking about how people treat their families. Hey girls, when you're looking at a dating relationship and you're looking at a boy and you're like, oh, he's so handsome, he looks so great. He's so cool, he's good at all the sports. He tells the best jokes. Look at how he treats his mom. Is he respectful to his mom? Is he respectful to his parents? Does he love them? Does he serve them? Is he honoring them? Because if he's not treating his mom that way, he's not going to treat you that way. And you deserve the best. Men, boys, how are you treating your families? How are you treating your sisters? Everybody in the church is looking at you. Dads, husbands, your kids learn how to treat their sisters and your wife by how you treat your wife. By how you treat your mom. Is it without love? Is it self-absorbed? Do you wrap it up in nice little words like honey or babe and say, get me that drink? Get my food? Or maybe you don't say it at all, you just expect it. A sense of entitlement. The kids are watching. Wives, when you talk to and about your husbands, are you slandering them? Are you complaining about them? When you get together with your ladies and your kids are sitting around and they're listening, are all you doing is complaining about the failures of your husbands? We can't do that. That's not who we're called to be. We're called to be people who love. How do people treat their families? How do you treat your family? Well, what traits should we have? And if we're going to be not without love, if we're going to have love, what does it look like? It looks like someone who's compassionate. And I know this isn't in all of us. Like, I know that we all don't have the ability to show our compassion in the right ways all the time, but we've got to try. Right? Are we humane? Do you treat your dog better than your wife? Do you treat your dog better than your sister? Do you treat your hamster better than your parents? I know it sounds like a joke, but it's the truth. Are you merciful? Are you soft-hearted? Are you sympathetic? And he continues and he says, in the last days, people who are all about me will be unforgiving. Do you know who the most forgiving people are? The people who understand what they've actually been forgiven of. The people who acknowledge the forgiveness that they need in their life. The people who look at what God did on the cross and are like, wow, why me, God? Why did you do it for me? And they live a life of forgiveness. This idea of unforgiving, it means irreconcilable. Someone who's unwilling to make a treaty. Someone who doesn't even want to be at peace with people. Like, you know who those people are. They're the people that you get into a conversation with and you're like, why you always got to fight me? People who are merciless. They're unwilling to be at peace with others. They can't even be persuaded to get into a covenant with you. So maybe the questions you need to ask when you're considering relationships with people, romantic or platonic, you say, is this someone who holds grudges? Because the only reason you hold a grudge is because you don't understand that you needed forgiveness yourself. Is this someone who holds grudges and is unwilling to make peace with others? Is this someone who just wants to fight me all the time? Be careful of troublemakers in your relationships. Are you a troublemaker? Are you the person that people avoid because they're like, every time I talk with that person, something happens. Drama. Yeah, you guys know, I got some ums on that one. You guys have some people in your life. You know who the drama people are. They're not just on TV. Be careful of troublemakers, someone who stirs the pot, someone who seems like they're happier fighting than they are at peace. Well, what traits should we have? We should be the kind of people who are abiding. We should be patient. We should be tolerant. We should be accepting. Understanding that people have flaws because of it's our sin nature. Sin has broken us down, and so we all have flaws. Guess what? None of us have arrived. Like, we're all in need of forgiveness every second of the day, all the time. And so we need to be patient with people. We need to be charitable and forgiving ourselves. Merciful. Relenting, gracious. Another thing that Paul writes, he says, people in the end, the last days, they're going to be slanderous. Do you know what that word slanderer means? Slanderous? It's the word devil. Because that's what Satan is. He's a slanderer. He's an accuser. He speaks evil of us. He's a backbiter. False accusations. Well, who should we be? We should be complimentary. Do you compliment people? Like, for real? Do you compliment people to other people? You know, it's easy to look at somebody that, you're trying to impress them. Hey, you look great, or I love how you did that thing. It's harder to tell other people about how great other people are. Let's get rid of the red flag of slanderous speech, of tearing people down. All right, continue. People who are without self-control. They can't control themselves. They just kind of do what they want, whenever they want, and they just don't have the ability. The ability is there, but they're not willing. They're not willing to do the right thing when the time calls for it. Someone who's brutal. The word for brutal there is savage or untamed. Someone who's not gentle. In your marriage, are you brutal towards your spouse? Wives, when your husband asks a question, do you bite his head off? Because you're frustrated with him. Husbands, do you come home and just kind of yell at the family? I had a bad day today, so I'm going to take it out on everybody else. That's not who we should be. We shouldn't be those kind of people. We shouldn't be brutal and savage. We shouldn't be fierce, like it says. This word for brutal here, it says, having or showing the desire to inflict severe pain and suffering on others. You say, well, that's not me. I don't do that. Well, do you though? You see, when we lack the self-control, when our patience is short, then we can be brutal in the way that we treat people. Got to be careful with that, okay? So what should we be instead? We should be easygoing. We should be light. We should be soft with people. We should be gentle with people. Compassionate and good-hearted, kind-hearted. I mean, this isn't news to us, right? We get this. And Paul wraps it up and he says that those people are not lovers of, listen, notice that, the good, not good. Many times this verse is read and people say they're not lovers of good. No, it's the good because it stands for the good things in life, the good people. They don't love people who are good. And it kind of goes back to that thing when you're not for people. You're all for yourself. Now, we could keep going, and I'm not going to break down every single one of these things, like treacherous, rash, somebody who's not thoughtful, they're conceited. The word for conceited there is puffed up. It's literally to wrap in smoke or mist. Figuratively, to be very proud or arrogant. It actually comes from the word from a Greek god, typhon, where we get our word typhoon, a whirlwind, a bunch of damaging wind. Someone who's conceited is described that way. They're essentially full of hot air that just damages all things around them. And they're blinded by their own pride and their own conceit. Well, what should we be instead? Well, it kind of goes back. It's almost like a bookend. It comes back to, well, we got to be humble. We got to be egoless. Down to earth. Pastor Andrew, this is a wonderfully uplifting message today. If we take it to heart, it can be. Because I've been wrestling with this stuff myself. I looked at this passage a couple weeks ago, and I was just like, it's just been thinking, in all my interactions, how am I interacting? Am I being a lover of pleasure rather than a lover of God? Because a lover of pleasure is someone who wants things for themselves rather than loving God. All right. So let's move forward. In the end, it says they have a form of godliness. They appear to be godly. So on the outside, it looks like they've got it all together. But they deny God's power in their life. His power to give them self-control. His power to help them be compassionate and want to be brutal. They deny all of these things. The world should be able to look at the church and see an alternative way of living. The world should be able to look at the church and know that there's something different about them. In fact, Jesus even told us, okay, do you want to know the remedy for all this stuff? Andrew, you really hit us with the terrible junk. Well, yeah. But Jesus doesn't leave us there. That's the thing. He looked at his disciples and he said in John 13, 34 and 35, he says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. But he doesn't stop there. He says, here's the why. Why should you not be, I love me some me all the time? Because by loving other people, by being other people focused, everyone will know that you are my disciples. If you love one another. Well, what is love? I started singing the song in my head. What is love? Well, Paul also told us what love is. We read it at weddings. We read it in 1 Corinthians 13. It's known as the love chapter. And we read it and we think, this is only applicable to marriages, to people in marriage relationships, but that's not what that, Paul didn't write, and for those who are going to get married, please read 1 Corinthians chapter 13. No, it was in the context of a church that was struggling with I love me some me. It was in the context of a church that all it did was about pleasuring itself. It lived in Corinth, which was like the worst city in the time. Think of like Las Vegas on steroids. Think of worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. Corinth at that time, all they cared about was pleasure for themselves. And Paul writes and he says, look, you guys got to quit being about yourselves. You're a church in the middle of a place that doesn't love God, that cares only for themselves. And he says, love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't envy. It doesn't boast. It's not proud. It's almost like he wrote this one and then wrote the other one right next to it in 2 Timothy. It doesn't dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrong. It doesn't hold the grudges. Why not? Because love is forgiving. Love doesn't delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. That's who we should be. But in order to love, we've got to love God first. Newsflash, if you do not love God, you're not honestly, truly loving others because you don't know how to love. Until you receive true love, you can't give it. You can't truly love others until you love God. Then you'll actually reflect true love. I don't think I have any other verses in there, but 1 John 4:7 says this. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever doesn't love does not know God, because God is love. And then he continues in 1 John 4, verse 9, and this is really cool. He says, no one has ever seen God. But if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. I love me some me. But that's not what I should be. The Bible says that no one's seen God unless we love God and then love others. You see, what happens if I love God? God, I love you and I'm trying to live for you. If I'm looking up to God and seeking God and loving God, then I stop looking at the mirror. And what happens with the mirror? What happens when I stop pointing the mirror at myself? A mirror is meant to reflect. What happens when we stop looking in the mirror? We start to reflect the love from God onto others. You turn that mirror around and away from yourself. You're going to start, notice this light is not coming from me. Where's it coming from? It hurts, doesn't it? That's what God's love is meant to do. Hurt? Who said that? It hurts so good. God's love is meant to reflect off of us so that other people, as we love other people, we're turning the mirror away from ourselves. And here we go again. We are reflecting God's love. We're reflecting God's love. We're showing people who God is, because no longer, if I shine this light in your face, Keith, can you see me? Thank you, Joe. No. All you see is that light, and you wonder where that light's coming from. And so what do you start to do? How many people, I want to know, when I started shining that around, looked up here at the lights, looked to see where the lights came from? Okay, nobody. I did. But that's what will happen. People will start to wonder, where's that light coming from? Why is he shining so much? Why is she shining so much? Why does she love so much? Because she or he has received God's love and is reflecting it perfectly. Red flags in relationships. I love me some me. Worship team, come on forward. We're going to finish up this song. We're going to point to the one that we're supposed to be looking at for understanding how to do this. Being a Christian isn't easy. Being a Christian is difficult. Following God, following Jesus, it causes us to look at the red flags in our own life. It causes us to look at the red flags in our own relationships. But it's all good, because as you look at these flags, go ahead and stand with me. As you look at these flags in your life, then you start to understand, these are the things I need to fix. And when you start to think, these are the things I need to fix, that's when you realize the source of your fix, it doesn't come from you, it comes from God. And as you allow Him to fix you, as you allow Him to redeem you, as you allow Him to set the things right in your life, you begin to reflect that light. You begin to reflect that love, and people start asking questions. And people say, I want to know this God that you know. I want to be part of the real life connections that you're in. But they're not going to see the light if you don't give them the light, if you walk around like this all day. So let's turn that mirror around. Let's start loving other people. And it happens when you run to the Father, all right? Amen? All right, let's sing.